We're going to explain the 5 things that you need to know to choose the right bike saddle. If your current saddle is uncomfortable, stop. There is another way. It doesn't have to be like that. And having a saddle that's uncomfortable can ruin your whole experience as a cyclist.
I need to get a new saddle.
And by knowing the 5 things that we're going to explain in this video, you should be well equipped to choose one that's right for you. To demonstrate all of this, I'm in the best place possible, which is Seller Italia's HQ here in Italy. Now, Seller Italia are one of our sponsors here at GCN, which is great because they literally allow us to keep the lights on and make videos that you can watch for free. So I'm going to be using their saddles as examples throughout this video, but don't worry, all the things that I explain apply to other saddles too. The first thing we need to consider is the position of you, the rider, on the bike. If we think about how a beginner cyclist might sit on a bike, they're typically far more upright like this and very different compared to an experienced road cyclist. And this change in position has a huge impact in how your weight is distributed through into the saddle. City bikes or shopping bikes are designed for a really upright position like this, and consequently have saddles such as this that are really wide with loads of padding, also because they're not designed to be used in conjunction with padded shorts. Whereas a road bike saddle like this SLR is comparatively narrow and thin and has a lot less padding on it, and that's still comfortable, but it's because it's designed to be used when you're riding in a much more aggressive position. Oh, and if you're wondering what this contraption is that I'm sat on, it's Seller Italia's ID Match bike fitting jig. It's proper cool and really useful. If you want to know more about that, we have got some dedicated videos on it. The take-home message here is that your bike's geometry, how it's set up, and your experience as a cyclist will affect your saddle choice and your saddle comfort. You might have the right saddle already, but if it's not set up right, it might be really uncomfortable. And this is something that a good bike fitter can help you address. And something that can help identify this is pressure mapping. So I've got a pressure mapping pad on here. Now this is a cool bit of tech that shows where your weight is distributed through a saddle. And this is important because some people have a tendency to sit on the wrong part of the saddle, typically the nose. And as a result, you're putting a lot of pressure through the soft tissues, whereas what you want to do is put most of your pressure through your sit bones on this portion of the saddle and actually sit into it properly. And bike fitters can use pressure mapping like this, and there's some other solutions and things that they can look at as well to identify that and make sure that you are properly sat in the saddle. The next thing we need to consider is the width of the saddle, and this is largely determined by the width of your sit bones, which are these 2 bones here, because this is what primarily you sit on the bike. So to give you an example, I've got 2 saddles here. These are both Seller Italia SLRs, but this one is a narrower one. It's 130 millimeters wide, whereas this one is 145 millimeters wide. To determine the width of your sit bones, there's a number of different things you can do to measure them, but bike fitters often have useful contraptions such as this special jig, which can then tell you the width of your sit bones so you can decide if you need a narrower saddle or a wider one. Now, not all brands offer different widths of saddles, but Seller Italia does, and it's particularly useful. I happen to have a narrow 130 millimeter saddle, if you're interested, which you probably weren't. Next, we have the shape of the saddle. Now, the shape and profile of a saddle is super important and actually matters more to comfort than the padding that's on top of the saddle. Bike saddles come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and it's important to remember that the shapes of saddles has been continually evolving ever since bikes were first invented, and there's no better place to show you that than here in Seller Italia's museum. So they've got saddles here that are incredibly old. This is an antique from 1910, and we look at how the shape evolves over time. It's extraordinary, right through to when we quickly fast forward to the 90s, and you can see one of these saddles, this one belonged to to Marco Pantani, all custom, it's amazing. This is a Sella Italia Flight, and this is the shape of probably what most people would think of for a road bike saddle. But it's considerably different to what we have now. So the sort of next evolution in modern road bike saddles has been to make them shorter. So if we look at Mathieu van der Poel's Flight, this is his World Championship saddle, you can see that it's a good couple of centimetres shorter on the nose. The fact that saddles have evolved to become slightly shorter is a really good thing, because if you think back to when we were showing you the pressure mapping, it encourages riders to sit properly positioned on the saddle with their sit bones here and not sit on the nose of the saddle, which was found to, well, be unnecessary. There's also an added bonus of they're slightly lighter, there's a bit less material. But it's not just about length. The profile and the shape of the saddle matters as well. So if we take the Flight, which I've got here that Marco Pantani used to use and Mathieu van der Poel still does use, this is a very flat saddle in its profile, and it's ideal for riders who have a very aggressive position and like a sort of to be aero. And because it's very flat and also quite narrow where the sit bones go, it allows riders to sort of shuffle along its length and sit in various sort of places along it. Whereas at the opposite end of the spectrum, we have this, which is a Novus. Now, this saddle has a very curved profile, which helps encourage riders to just sit in the correct position on it, which is with your sit bones placed firmly here. The SLR, which is my personal favourite, my saddle of choice, is actually somewhere in between these two. So it's, got a slight curve to it. Which leads us on to the fourth thing you need to know about saddle comfort, which is cutouts. Now, these can be an absolute game changer in improving your comfort, and well, they have been for me. What they are is a slot that's cut into the centre of the saddle that allows you to relieve pressure on your soft tissues. If you're someone who experiences numbness or discomfort after a few hours on the bike, then a cutout could make all the difference. So for example, this is a Sella Italia SLR Superflow, and it's got a very big cutout, this one, but this is actually my saddle of choice. It's my saddle, I love it. Now, not everyone needs a cutout, and so they do make saddles with and without cutouts. The rest of the saddle shape is the same. So for example, this is also a Sella Italia SLR. You can see it's got the same profile, the same shape, but the cutout is solid, and some people prefer having that little bit more support there. It ultimately depends on your body and what you prefer, and certain things play a role, such as your flexibility and your position on the bike, but bike fitters can advise and help you with this. They often have test saddles you can try out. But the vast majority of saddles sold right now have large cutouts in them. We're talking 95%, and that's because most people prefer them and get along well with them. Even if you don't need a cutout, many people still prefer saddles that have them and just find them more comfortable. And the fifth thing you need to know about is the material and padding that a saddle is made from and has, because this is hugely important when it comes to the comfort and performance of a saddle. And you'll often find that the same saddle shape and profile is available, made from different materials and with different levels of padding on it. So, for example, we have this SLR here, which is the same shape as this one, but this one is bare carbon, which makes it very light and minimalist and ideal for hill climbs. But for longer rides, because it is bare carbon, you'd probably want a little bit more padding on there. But it is actually surprisingly comfortable. It might look like a sort of medieval torture device. It's actually surprisingly comfortable to sit on because it shares that same shape. You can then get saddles that have a bit of foam padding under the top here, and these are pretty common, but you can go a level above that and get additional padding. So this is also, again, an SLR. You can see it's got a bit more padding on it, and it's actually got gel inserts in it. Now these are ideal for riders who are perhaps doing endurance riding, or maybe they do a bit of off-road, a bit of gravel, and comfort is more of a priority. Some beginner riders can also prefer this additional level of padding as well. Now, it just helps dampen that vibration. But the most high-tech stuff that we have now is actually 3D printed. So this is an SLR that's got 3D printed padding, and the advantage of this is it allows the density of that padding to change throughout the profile of the saddle. So you can have it with higher density padding in the area where the sit bones go, because that's where you want it, and then softer density padding on places like the nose, where you want it to be softer and you don't want it to support you quite as much. It also means that the density can be tuned for a particular saddle as well. So this Novus might look outwardly quite similar, but you can just feel it when you touch it. Like, this is so much softer in that 3D printed padding on this model compared to the SLR, which is a lot harder. The other material part of a saddle that's important and can vary is the rail. So that's this part here that your bicycle clamps onto. Now, the material that it's made from can vary. Typically, the cheapest entry-level saddles are sort of a low-quality steel, which is quite heavy. And then more premium saddles typically use manganese rails, as well as more expensive alloys of steel and also carbon. Now, as these materials get lighter, they typically get more expensive. But there's another important feature of them, which is the comfort that they provide. So typically, carbon is a bit harsher when it's on a saddle rail and reduces the overall comfort that you experience. Whereas if you want a bit more comfort, then something like a manganese or an alloy railed saddle is going to be better. So there you have it, the 5 things that you need to know to choose the right saddle. Remember, the first one is the position of you on the bike. So if you want to learn more about bike fitting and how to achieve that optimal position, we've got a load of videos on that. If you found this useful and you haven't already, please do subscribe, as it really helps support the channel and improve what we do. Right, I'm going to go now and find some grappa, because it's local to here, and I feel like I've earned one.